Thank you so much for asking me to do this. I need to talk about this guy for just a minute. He actually had the same problem that I do. During the total eclipse of the sun in 1991, I actually lost hearing in my right ear at Monte Alban, which is a Zapotec ceremonial site in southern Mexico. You might have some ideas about why this happened, but I won't bore you with that today. I also just wanted to say, as Alexis mentioned, that why am I talking about these things today? They're kind of nerdy and different from what I usually talk about. It comes out of my clinical work, both as a primary care doctor and also as a professor of internal medicine, because one of my day jobs has been for many years to organize and teach courses in evidence-based medicine, how to evaluate the literature. So that's actually the reason that I am concerned about, one of the reasons I'm concerned. I also just want to clarify racial. This has to do with racial capitalism, in that capitalism can't get along without structural racism. And I'll be returning to that theme in a little while. So my purpose today is to clarify the ideological components of science in the global political economic system. The focus will be on epidemics of racial capitalism. From the standpoint of theory, the question has to do with how science as ideology serves and legitimates the capitalist system. And this is a perspective that was developed in depth by Herbert Marcuse and Jürgen Habermas. And it also has to do with the character of the capitalist state. That is, those of us who work in public health find ourselves within the welfare state, which is within the capitalist state. So this leads to certain conditions that I'll get back to. So this is the opening page of the famous chapter by Habermas, Technology and Science as Ideology, which he dedicated to Marcuse on his 70th birthday. And he wrote, "I believe that Marcuse's basic thesis, according to which technology and science today also take on the function of legitimating political power, is the key to analyzing the changed constellation." So this is a photo of Marcuse with his student, among other things, Angela Davis. This is the younger Habermas and the somewhat older Habermas. And I'll be talking about what seem to be some mysteries from the scientific point of view. That is, how science has addressed the recent epidemics, especially COVID. So from the standpoint of science as ideology, it's the importance of public health's positioning within the capitalist state, including the welfare state, as I mentioned. Given that the state's main objective, according to Marx and Engels and many who have followed, the state's main objective is to protect the capitalist political economic system. So there's a fundamental contradiction that confronts us in public health when we're based in the capitalist state. And one of the related issues is, so what's wrong with criticizing science? You know, one of the hegemonic notions during the pandemic was criticizing science is a no-no. It's very dangerous. I question that because that was a hegemonic view. So I'm going to analyze apparent mysteries in the scientific assessment of these epidemics through a series of case studies that clarify the ideological components of science related to racial capitalism. And because of time, I'm going to talk about some mysteries more than others today. So I'll talk about the more in-depth mysteries at first, and then I'll just summarize some of the findings a little later. So the first question, the first mystery, why has little attention been devoted to the prevention of pandemics by addressing their upstream sources? Their upstream sources, that is, in habitat destruction and industrial food production. Very rarely brought up. So first, what do we know about these upstream causes? And here I need to acknowledge Rob Wallace. If there were a Nobel Prize in our field, I think he deserves to have received that already. And his comrades who have worked closely with him. He'll be speaking later today, I think. So what I am going to talk with you about is in a sense an introduction. Rob and his colleagues have had a number of books and very influential articles, including Farming Human Pathogens, the book Big Farms Make Big Flu, the classic now book Dead Epidemiologists on the Origins of COVID-19, and the most recent book, The Fault in Our SARS, COVID-19 in the Biden Era. And what I really wanted to emphasize is that Rob and his colleagues have collaborated with us on our series of pamphlet manifestos called Moving Beyond Capitalism Now, exclamation point. And two of the manifestos in that series are Moving Beyond Capitalist Agriculture, Could Agroecology Prevent Further Pandemics? And Abolitionist Agroecology, Sovereignty and Pandemic Prevention. And both of these, by the way, are out currently in Spanish as well as English. So what are the upstream causes? Well, this pandemic and every other important emerging viral epidemic in the recent past, and predictably into the future, come from the same upstream causes. First, capitalist industrial agriculture. Second, the destruction of natural habitat. Third, the production of meat. Pretty straightforward. In addition to viral epidemics, these similar agricultural practices also deepen the parallel crises of multi-drug resistant bacterial infections through overuse of antibiotics in meat and fish production, the climate crisis and the long distance transportation of food that requires burning of petroleum, and plastic pollution by agricultural packaging methods and other severe environmental problems. So according to Rob's and his colleagues' studies, the natural forest habitat previously provided ecological control, CoV2, and their hosts, such as bats. Clearing the habitat for industrial agriculture emerged in just one area as China's liberalization after Mao, and when China joined the capitalist world economic system, including capitalist agriculture. But similar zoonotic sources of transmission from destroyed habitats have in SARS-1, and also HIV, were from the same causes, and in Latin America, Africa, and elsewhere, Zika. And there's actually a long list that includes Nipah virus and many others coming from the same causes. So the capitalist industrial production of meat especially applies to pigs and chickens, but there's also other species involved. And one of the important things to remember is that the entire life course of these animals, from offspring to adulthood, slaughter and packaging, happen within generally unsanitary, dangerous factory conditions with little regulatory oversight and control. And this is one of my favorites, a pet peeve, Smithfield Farms. That's actually the logo that they had during the swine flu epidemic in 2009. This is how their main factory looked at a time. It looked nothing like this quaint little red farm. And so that's the point. It's become industrialized under capitalism, and everything that happens to animals happens in this industrial structure. So this is a photo of the way pigs give birth and grow up. The mother pig and all her babies basically held in this very tiny space for their entire lives. And this is a photo of what happens when there's a flu epidemic, a swine flu epidemic, or swine diarrhea, influenza, or anything like that. Massive kill-offs of pigs. So I'm particularly concerned about the swine flu epidemic because I took part in it to some extent. This actually began within a mile of Smithfield Foods' notorious industrial pig farm operation in a rural area of Veracruz State in Mexico. So Smithfield Foods had outsourced the operation from the US, partly to avoid occupational and environmental cleanup requirements. And this was actually has to do with environmental and occupational racial justice, because this outsourcing problem, of course, involves a tremendous exploitation of communities in the global South. And this is a photo from the Veracruz operation. As you see at the bottom is basically excretion. And then this is a holding pond, and the factory is here. And into the holding pond, various things are dropped, including from a pipe, fresh fecal waste and urine. So at that time, Mexican public health authorities and investigators, including me at the periphery, reported this epidemiological association between swine flu and capitalist agriculture. But that was pretty much ignored from the public health establishment, including CDC, WHO, and all other international health organizations, which pursued reductionist strategies like the swine flu vaccine, rather than confront the radical change in the meat processing industry. In later studies around 2014, it was shown definitively the swine flu resulted from the Smithfield Farms industrial production, but that didn't change the reductionist approach to pandemics like swine flu. Later, during COVID-19, a Hong Kong-based investment corporation, WH Group Limited, had acquired Smithfield Foods already in 2013. In 2018, their executives in Virginia, where the subsidiary is located, welcomed the ongoing epidemic of African swine fever because they argued in their trade journals a reduced global supply of pork would lead to major increases in prices and therefore profitability for the corporation. During the pandemic itself, Smithfield executives reassured US consumers that the corporation did not import pork from China, which was a big concern in the USA, but instead exported US pork to China, where prices were higher. And Smithfield pork processing plants around the country, but especially in South Dakota, became some of the largest COVID-19. And this, as I said before, showed, again, structural racism because of the mostly minority or immigrant workers affected by this industrial process. The infection spread rapidly to workers because of similar unsanitary working conditions, which threatened to close various meat-producing plants in the United States. And President Trump actually gave an order that required Smithfield and other meat industry workers to work as essential workers. So there was no lockdown, or basically meatpacking workers had to work during the pandemic, even though most of this production that Trump was trying to protect went to China rather than the USA. So the question is there an alternative to capitalist industrial agriculture to feed us? And the answer is yes, of course. Around the world as we speak, often against resistance from corporations and governments, farmers are returning to peasant or smallholder, as it's called, agricultural practices. And I can tell you, because I've been involved in these myself, both in the USA and in Korea, this is a very exciting and fun thing to be working on. And there's actually a whole body of research that's shown that such practices are not only safer than capitalist agriculture, but actually more efficient and productive as well. And this is only one of many books and articles now that pertain to the advantages technically of peasant or smallholder agriculture as opposed to capitalist industrial agriculture. So to answer this mystery, a possible explanation is that pharmaceutical corporations, big food, and international financial institutions closely linked to state-based public health agencies sought only reductionist approaches like vaccines and medications, rather than upstream approaches that would involve more fundamental change in the social determination of pandemics in capitalist industrial production. So the second mystery that I'll talk about briefly is, why did scientific journals and government regulatory agents such as the Food and Drug Administration in the USA and similar regulatory agencies in Europe and elsewhere, why did they not require the reporting of measures of absolute risk reduction rather than only relative risk reduction for evaluating vaccine effectiveness, even though these indicators of absolute risk reduction were absolutely required by the journals and by the regulatory agencies before COVID-19. And this is, as a teacher and clinician in evidence-based medicine, was something that blew my mind throughout the pandemic, and actually that of many of my scientifically oriented colleagues. Let me tell you why. It was because this whole approach erased evidence-based indicators that are very important to evaluate the effectiveness of vaccines. So this is the nerdy part. So what is relative risk reduction? It's a calculation that shows the difference in event rate between those receiving and not receiving an intervention, especially as a percentage of the event rate, expressed as a percentage of the event rate among those not receiving an intervention. So this is a definition used in the major published randomized controlled trials of the vaccines. This is the formula that's used to calculate relative risk reduction. And until now, essentially all scientific publications about COVID-19 vaccines, with very rare exceptions, have assessed their effectiveness by measuring relative risk reduction, which compares people who receive vaccination with those who don't. What is absolute risk reduction? Well, this is a calculation that shows the difference from a group's baseline event rate in the population between those receiving and not receiving an intervention. That is, it indicates the reduction of risk from the group's baseline risk that results from the intervention. It measures an individual's baseline risk in a population. And this is the formula used to calculate that. From the absolute risk reduction, you can calculate the number needed to vaccinate, or NNV, which is a very important indicator in in the evaluation of vaccines. This is a calculation that shows the number of people needed to be vaccinated in order to prevent one pertinent event in one person, such as a symptomatic infection by COVID. The NNV is actually the reciprocal of ARR, or 1 over ARR. Importantly, NNV indicates the number of people who should be vaccinated to prevent one adverse outcome, such as getting sick or needing hospitalization from COVID-19. And this is what has been essentially completely erased in the medical literature regarding COVID-19 vaccines. I know this sounds hard to believe. If you don't believe it, please try to find the publications that actually deal with absolute risk reduction regarding the vaccines or that estimate numbers needed to vaccinate. Another critical indicator from evidence-based medicine is the absolute risk of the intervention, or ARI, which is the rate of the intervention's adverse effects, that is, the risks. ARI is calculated by subtracting the rate of adverse effects in the group not receiving an intervention from that in the group receiving an intervention. And the number needed to harm, or NNH, is a calculation that shows how many people need to be vaccinated to cause harm for one person. NNH is the reciprocal of ARI, 1 over ARI. And the thing to remember is that to do evidence-based benefit risk analysis, as they're called, we need to compare NNV and NNH under varying conditions. This also has been completely erased. So again, if you can find a risk-benefit analysis of the main COVID-19 vaccines, please let me know. This is the thing that gets at least some of us very upset about the science involved in the vaccines. It got my colleagues and me so upset that we actually did a study in which we struggled to take the data as far as we could obtain it from the published articles about the vaccines. They weren't raw data because those data are proprietary. You can't actually get them from the pharmaceutical industries, and we won't be able to get them probably for years. But we were able to figure out from the publications how to calculate these indicators for some of the key indicators. And what we found, and this is a press release that's been in various popular publications now, is using an alternative analysis based on evidence-based medicine. We found that the effectiveness of COVID vaccines is much greater in areas of the world with higher prevalence of infection, an approach that could lead to more equitable distribution of vaccines. And this goes on from the press release in a peer-reviewed paper, blah, blah, blah. The investigators calculated and compared ARR and NNV in different geographical areas. And then a quote from me: at certain times during the pandemic, the NNV, number needed to vaccinate to prevent one hospitalization in some parts of the world, was less than 1,000, whereas in other locations, it was more than 10,000. And to continue my quote, so vaccine distribution should target subpopulations with higher baseline risks of disease, rather than focusing only on the goal of vaccinating entire populations. So this is my nerdy, scientifically based conclusion, based on this pretty rigorous study that was the best we could do about evidence-based indicators. So the conclusion from this, tentatively, to the mystery, is that publications from pharmaceutical corporations reported only relative risk reduction, erasing absolute risk reduction. And high-impact journals and state agencies continued this erasure of absolute measures with very profound implications for vaccine distribution policies. To go on, and now I'll start getting briefer in reporting the findings. So the third mystery is, why have random sampling techniques not been used to implement estimates of incidence and prevalence, instead of relying on less valid and more expensive case finding? So there are only a handful of places throughout the world that actually try to sample populations to find, on the basis of random sampling, what the actual rates for prevalence and incidence of COVID-19 has been during the pandemic. One place, for instance, is Kerala, a state in India. Another is, to a limited extent, in the United Kingdom. And there are a few other places. But in general, no significant random sampling has been done, even though it's easy to do and cheap to do. Why not? So this is another thing that makes me mad. And as far as we can tell, the only reasonable answer is that population-based sampling moves policymaking from individual behaviors to population level interventions. So it's not consistent with individual level interventions, such as vaccines. Fourth mystery: why were standard measures of variation, error, and data quality not reported consistently by state-based agencies? So I think, as all of you realize, if you've looked at any of the dashboards, Hopkins dashboard, the New York Times, Oxford, WHO, there's been no regular reporting for measures of variability and uncertainty of estimates. Even easy measures of variability like standard deviation, minimum, maximum, confidence intervals aren't there. The lack of such measures makes it much more difficult to assess the validity and reliability of the estimates using measures of central tendencies and percentages. And this is today's WHO dashboard, which reports things like this: the deaths, saying nothing about the variability of that as an estimate, because it is an estimate, and the reliability of that in terms of action, and the validity in terms of actually measuring an accurate prevalence rate and incidence rate. So such detailed reporting would detract from reductionist policies about individual behaviors and technical solutions, because it would force us to actually evaluate findings that are not very accurate and apply in ways to not help with vaccine distribution policies. Fifth mystery: why were mRNA vaccines developed initially rather than protein-based vaccines previously used with high safety and low costs? This is quite mysterious. As has already been said by multiple speakers, the National Institutes of Health invested an enormous amount of taxpayers' money and basically handed it over to the drug companies manufacturing these vaccines, when protein-based vaccines could have been developed and actually were developed after the mRNA vaccines were sold at enormous profits in the developed countries of North America and Europe and some other countries. And not reaching much of the global south. So the protein-based vaccines, which have shown to be essentially equally effective as mRNA vaccines developed in Cuba, India, and elsewhere, are actually what is reaching the global south. Why did they come second rather than first, and without a clear sense of how they would be effective or not? So the protein-based vaccines would not facilitate profiteering by private sector pharmaceutical corporations and their state-based supporters. So the final mystery that I'll refer to is how have scientific reports, policy recommendations, and public health interventions differed for public health organizations within or aligned with the capitalist state versus those those intentionally not aligned with the state. And I won't give you the observations because of time, but the tentative conclusion is there are actually very different policies by state versus non-state allied organization in capitalist and non-capitalist countries. One of the best examples of that actually has been developed by Rob Wallace and other comrades, and I've been peripherally involved in that. That is the People's CDC in the USA, which takes a critical approach to the state-based CDC, and in my opinion, has made an enormous contribution and will continue to do that. So why is this mystery still there? Organizations, as I said, within the capitalist state have favored, not as aligned with the capitalist state, have favored population-based, non-pharmaceutical interventions. So in conclusion, the ideological components of science subtly marginalize research questions and methods, so they don't illuminate the social determination of epidemics and their outcomes. The alignment of public health organizations with the capitalist state shapes the contents and impacts of our scientific work. Confronting the root causes of epidemics, as well as most other crucial problems during our current catastrophe, this requires moving beyond the ideological effects that science achieves on behalf of racial capitalism. So I just wanted to share, this is a book on social medicine and the coming transformation that considers several of these themes. And this is a book I've had a lot of trouble finishing, that's still in progress, and we'll see the light of day someday, that goes into more depth on these issues. So again, thank you very much, and I look forward, feel free for your questions and feedback.
Thank you very much, Howard. Thank you. You can close your share screen.
Sure. Okay.
I mean, never mind. So thank you. It was really inspiring, as it was expected, of course. And you gave us a lot of also work to do home, because we have to see all the risks approach, which are, I think, yes, very, very valued for our approach of population-based and needs-based health policies, and not driven by the drugs, the pharma interests. So thank you very much. I see the population here ready to thank you.
Well, seriously, I would welcome constructive criticism.
Now you can see the theater also. You see the theater.
Hello,
it's a packed theater, and thank you very much. It was great to see you, great to hear you. And now we are going to discuss that outside of the room, continuing our conference. Okay. So thank you. It's great.